Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Kristian Stevenson and this evening we are joined by SNP President Maureen Watt. Good evening, Maureen.
Good evening, Kristian. Pleased to meet you.
Pleasure's all ours. Our time is to start with the current international headlines, starting with the Middle East update. So at present, at least 54,981 Palestinians have been killed and 126,920 injured in Gaza since the October 7th attacks in 2023. This is according to the Gaza Health Authority. Our next headline, the US no longer wholeheartedly endorses an independent state for Palestinians. US Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee told Bloomberg News in an interview published on Today. The UK government will formally sanction two far-right Israeli ministers, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Benazir Smotrich, following their conduct over the war in Gaza, the Times reported today. The UK will join Canada, Australia, New Zealand and other nations in freezing the assets and imposing travel bans on Israel's National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, a West Bank settler, and Finance Minister Smotrich. Last month, the government suspended free trade talks with Israel for pursuing outrageous policies in the illegally occupied West Bank and Gaza, summoned its ambassador and announced further sanctions against West Bank settlers. Next, more than 300 Foreign Office staff have been told to consider resigning after they wrote a letter over fears the government has become complicit in Israel's alleged war crimes in Gaza. It is the fourth internal letter from staff about the Israeli offensive in Gaza. In their letter of 16th May, the staff from embassies around the world and at various levels of seniority questioned the UK's continued arms sales and what they called Israel's stark disregard for international law. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that there has been significant progress in hostage talks. It's too early to raise hopes, he said in a video statement, but we are working tirelessly right now and all the time. I hope we will be able to move forward. Pressure is mounting on Israel to reach a ceasefire and allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. After nearly 2 years of fighting, 54 hostages remain in Gaza, of whom about 31 are thought to be dead. As the war rages on, the chances of their continuing survival diminishes. The President of the European Parliament has been in constant contact with Israeli authorities over the MEP Rima Hassan, who was detained after naval forces intercepted an aid ship bound for Gaza. Hassan, a French MEP of Palestinian origin, who belongs to the France Unbowed party, was on board the Madeleine, which is carrying a symbolic amount of food and aid for Gaza when it was intercepted by Israeli forces. Furthermore, Israel has deported Swedish campaigner Greta Thunberg after she was detained along with other activists aboard a Gaza-bound aid boat. Thunberg accused Israel of kidnapping us in international waters and taking us against our will to Israel after security forces intercepted a boat carrying humanitarian aid bound for Gaza. In a new report, the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory has said that Israel's attacks in Gaza amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Okay, so Maureen, if I could bring you into the conversation now, what's your opinion on the developing situation in Gaza?
Well, I think it's, in the main, more of the same, in that clearly Netanyahu wants to just erase Gaza from the face of the earth. I think the alternative humanitarian aid in terms of food has been an utter disaster. So many people have been killed when queuing for food under the new method of giving it out, and it's clearly not worked. I think the pressure on the Israeli right-wing minister is very interesting and a move in the right direction. Your report was kind of mentioning so many things, it's difficult to keep up with everything. I do think the humanitarian boat that left southern Italy, or was it Sicily, with Greta Thunberg on board was more about Greta Thunberg than making a statement about what's going on in Gaza. I think that has failed miserably. And what did she expect if it wasn't to be detained, in my view? The one light, I think, is that there are more talks on hostages in this report than there have been previously. I mean, the fact that so many have died during this siege, and with only, 32 possibly left alive, is just horrific. So I hope there's perhaps some movement on that. But the scenes of thousands and thousands of people rushing to try and get food was, to me, it looked like something out of biblical times. It was just awful.
Absolutely shocking, isn't it? Particularly with the ongoing blockade and it's going on in Gaza, Greta Thunberg just being merely the most well-known figure to have been stopped, it says, in Gaza. Grand. So if you want, I'm just going to move on to our Ukraine update. So Kiev and the port city of Odessa came under massive drone attacks from Russia earlier today. Ukrainian officials have said one person was killed and at least 4 wounded in Odessa after a residential building and medical facilities were hit. The port city's governor said in a statement on Tuesday. An AFP journalist in central Kiev heard at least a dozen explosions and gunfire as air defences tried to bring down the approaching drones. Buildings and cars in several districts were burning and debris was noted to have fallen near a school. The attack came a day after Russia launched almost 500 drones at Ukraine in the biggest overnight drone bombardment of the 3-year war so far. This according to the Ukrainian Air Force. As the Kremlin presses ahead with its summer offensive, in addition to the 479 drones, 20 missiles of various types were fired at different parts of Ukraine from Sunday to Monday, according to the Air Force, which said that the barrage targeted mainly central and western areas. A recent escalation in aerial attacks has coincided with a renewed Russian battlefield push along eastern and northeastern parts of the roughly 1,000-kilometre front line. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said late on Sunday that in some of those areas the situation is very difficult and has provided no further details. Amid direct peace talks that have yet to deliver any progress on actually stopping the fighting, Russia and Ukraine swapped another batch of prisoners on Monday. Those who were swapped included wounded soldiers as well as those under 25. President Zelensky said, "The process is quite complicated. There are many sensitive details. Negotiations continue virtually every day." He added the exchange was the result of direct talks between the two sides in Istanbul on the 2nd of June, and that resulted in an agreement to exchange at least 1,200 POWs on each side, and to repatriate thousands of bodies of those killed in Russia's war in Ukraine. Neither side said how many prisoners had been swapped this Monday. In other news, Russia's Civil Aviation Authority, Rosaviatsia, said earlier today it temporarily halted flights at all 4 major airports serving the Moscow area. This was to ensure safety after the Defense Ministry said that Ukraine was carrying out a drone attack on Russia. Seems at this time Russia is determined to test the resolve of the NATO alliance, including by extending its confrontation with the West beyond the borders of Ukraine. Germany's foreign intelligence chief told the Table media news organisation, Bruno Kahl, the head of the Federal Intelligence Service, said his agency had clear intelligence indications that Russian officials believed the collective defence obligations enshrined in the NATO treaty no longer had practical force. "We are quite certain, and we have intelligence showing it, that Ukraine is only a step on the journey westward," Kahl told Table Media in a podcast interview. Germany, already the second largest provider of armaments and financial support for Ukraine in its war with Russia, has pledged to step up its support further under the new government of Chancellor Friedrich Merz, promising to help Ukraine develop new missiles that could strike deep into Russian territory. And that's our update on Ukraine. Maureen, I was wondering if I could just get your opinion on the developments on this ongoing conflict.
Well, it's odd, isn't it? I mean, is the Russian attack directly on the cities of Kyiv itself and Odessa, is that their retaliation against the very bold, you must admit, and brave and successful incursion by Ukraine into far into Russia and attacking their airports and taking out a lot of planes of the Russian defense force that were, obviously helping that side in this war. If it is, or are we waiting for something even more horrible from Russia? Because Putin has said that retaliation is obviously in his mind, and clearly Trump didn't have the nous to say, you do that and A, B, C, and D are consequences for us, which is absolutely appalling. I think the exchange of prisoners obviously is a good thing, but the state, did you see the state of some of the prisoners returned to Ukraine was absolutely awful. Their health was obviously clearly affected, their physical health, not to say what their mental state is going to be. The good points are the exchange of prisoners and the return of bodies, if you can say that that's a good thing, but clearly for their loved ones, it is. But the talks, if the talks in Turkey are just about exchange of prisoners, we're not going to get very far very soon. And maybe, I don't know, are both sides trying to prolong the war until Europe fills the void created by the US? I'm not sure on that point.
Yeah, well, we just need to be thankful for any sort of progress that we get, including prisoner exchange, and just hope that this conflict doesn't escalate any further. Right, what I'm going to do right now is move on to some national news. So, UK unemployment is at the highest level in almost 4 years. In further detail, unemployment in the UK rose to 4.6% in the 3 months to April, the highest level we've seen since 2021, as businesses responded to increased employment costs introduced by the UK government this April. Figures from the Office of National Statistics show a weakening labour market with a monthly drop of 109,000 in payroll employees recorded in May. That marks the largest fall since the height of the pandemic. Vacancies also declined by 63,000 over the same 3-month period. The rise in unemployment has coincided with the introduction of higher employer national insurance contributions and an uplift in the national living wage. The UK government's decision to raise employer national insurance contributions by £25 billion has affected around 1 million businesses, increasing the cost of employing staff. This has led some employers, particularly in lower wage sectors like hospitality and retail, to reduce staff numbers or delay recruitment. Since the UK government's autumn budget in October, payroll figures have fallen by 276,000. Earnings growth has also slowed, with regular wages rising by 5.2% in the year to April, down from 5.5% in the previous quarter. In a statement, the Scottish Government said the labour market in Scotland remained resilient, with a high number of payrolled employees and median pay above the UK average. However, it warned that the UK Government's approach has placed added financial pressure on public services, care providers and charities operating across Scotland. Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes called for full funding to cover increased employer national insurance contribution costs within the UK Government's upcoming spending review. The Scottish Government has repeated its calls for measures to support employers and protect jobs, particularly in sectors most affected by rising employment costs. So, Maureen, what do you think are firstly, what is your opinion of this and how it's going to affect Scotland? And are you seeing that signs of unemployment across the UK are reflected in Scotland itself?
Well, I think the latest figures that I saw for Scotland showed that the unemployment rate in Scotland was lower than it was in the rest of the UK. But I don't know if we have the most up-to-date figures to compare with the latest from the UK government. I mean, clearly it shows that there's no understanding of economic policy or economic factors in what the UK government has done. I mean, if they're increasing the burden on employers, then they're going to employ fewer figures. That surely is a given. If they want growth in the economy and there are fewer people employed, fewer people paying taxes, then you're not going to get growth if firms are not expanding by taking on people rather than contracting. So I really don't get the economics of what this Labour government are doing, also given the fact that they seem to be U-turning on everything that they wanted to do when they first came in to office, which was to reduce the debt. So what they're going to do tomorrow in the statement, the budget statement, will be very interesting to hear. But I can't see, I mean, they keep saying that growth is the only way out of the current situation, and yet they're doing everything in their power to make it more difficult to get that growth.
Yes, I fully agree. Now, just what measures would you like to see the UK government announce tomorrow to try and promote growth? What, in your opinion, should government be doing?
Well, I think, and this is perhaps something that we're going to come on to later, is build houses. I was reading somewhere that, most of I was listening to the radio today, and, about the winter fuel payment, and some younger people saying that, they're well looked at, the older people are well looked after, and we should look after the younger folk. And of course, they're feeling hard done by because the cost of housing is so much higher than it was, for example, in my day as a percentage of your income. And the cost of housing goes up because there are not enough houses around. So I think a big push on housing would help make people feel that they didn't have to pay high rents or high costs for housing. And that would come down, and therefore they would have more of their income free to do other things, because everybody is, £15,000 worse off than we were in 2008. I mean, that's a big difference in your disposable income. And that's why people are plain scunnered and just feel that they're on a treadmill, that they're not going to get off and not ever feel any better about the economy and about the state of Britain.
Absolutely, and that's £15,000 in real terms that since 2008, which is absolutely shocking when you think about it.
Mm.
Now, actually,
but when you see what they've done, the economic crash, then Brexit and Liz Truss and things, the number of huge mistakes that have cost billions to the economy. It's little wonder that we're in the state we're in, and surely we could do better if we were in control of our own economy.
Absolutely. Now, it actually brings into the next story quite well. So, John Sweeney, our First Minister, has been calling for UK government action to support the housing sector. So, I used the opportunity in this week's spending review to highlight growing pressures across Scotland's housing sector. Speaking ahead of an address to the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations in Glasgow, the First Minister pointed to a housing crisis in Scotland and outlined the Scottish Government's commitment of £768 million for affordable housing in 2025 to 26, most of it directed towards social rent. This includes up to £40 million for acquiring existing properties, which which is aimed at reducing the number of homeless families in temporary accommodation. Swinney also urged the UK government to provide multi-year funding settlements to allow housing developers and third sector partners greater financial certainty. He called for action to unfreeze local housing allowance rates, which affect support for private renters, arguing that adjusting them to reflect 30% of local market rents would provide more stability for low-income households. Separately, an independent housing investment task force has published proposals aimed at boosting confidence in Scotland's housing market. The task force report recommends attracting more non-governmental investment into affordable housing, supporting shared home ownership schemes, and encouraging more entrepreneurial approaches from public bodies involved in housing delivery. Scottish Housing Minister Paul McLennan welcomed the report's findings and confirmed that its recommendations will be reflected in the upcoming programme for government. The Scottish Government says it plans to work with partners to increase investor confidence and deliver more homes across all tenures. With the UK Government's spending review expected to set out major funding allocations, the Scottish Government is pressing for clarity on how much will be available for Scotland and how UK-wide decisions, including local housing allowance levels, will affect housing directly north of the border. Now, Maureen, affordable housing has been an ongoing issue in Scotland for many years now. What policies do you think the Scottish Government should have in place to try and mitigate this situation?
Yeah, while you were giving us that report, Kristian, I was thinking, all this stems from Maggie Thatcher's right to buy. And of course, the Scottish Government a number of years ago stopped the right to buy of council housing or social housing. But it was just a tap where you would be building more houses, but it would all be draining out because of the right to buy. But yet still we have a housing crisis. And I think the main tenet of the report today is about trying to get to lever in more private sector housing, private sector finance into the housing sector. I mean, I'm a great supporter of housing associations and the houses that they buy. I think if they can lever in housing, they manage to build it much more quickly for some reason than council housing, although I'm not against council housing. But I think housing associations seem to manage their money and their incomes better. I mean, there are examples of poor housing repairs and things in that sector as in council housing. But I think if there is a way of levering more private sector money into housing, and I don't just mean the builders building more, and actually doing things like keeping to their 25% social housing in any housing development they have, and things like that is important. I think buying back housing is good, but it's fraught with difficulties as well, because the housing may need certain repairs and things like that. One other thing that I would do, actually thinking about it, Kristian, is make sure that councils do not have so many voids on their housing stock. There are a number of councils, including Aberdeen, for example, where they've got far too many houses lying empty because they don't get round to repairing them to a standard that the people can move into, and that must be tackled by councils. So it's not all about Scottish Government, it's about councils who've been given money by Scottish Government to do this, to get on and do it.
Grand. And what would you say the private sector and industry bodies, construction firms, housing associations, what are they saying is the solution to this problem?
Well, clearly, they have got a big problem because they see day-to-day people coming to them wanting houses. I think the planning departments have got a lot to answer for. They seem to be a major blockage in Scotland compared to England, we hear. And the land banking that housing construction firms do shouldn't be allowed either. They shouldn't be allowed to bank it for years and years and years and hope that the price goes up so that the price of each house on that land goes up as well. I think that's a scandal.
Absolutely. Well, we'll just have to wait and see what reaction we get from the UK government in their spending review tomorrow. Yeah, so moving on, the UK Chancellor announced a £14.2 billion investment in the Sizewell C nuclear power plant in England on Tuesday, alongside plans for an increased spending on defence, transport and infrastructure ahead of tomorrow's spending review. The investment aims to boost energy security, create 10,000 jobs and support Britain's long-term economic growth. However, the announcements included little detail on additional funding for Scotland or how much, barring consequential, might flow to the Scottish Government, while some social security payments for the poorest appear set to face cuts. The Sizewell C project, located in Suffolk, will create thousands of jobs during construction, including 1,500 apprenticeships. The government expects around 70% of contracts to go to over 3,500 British suppliers, supporting industries such as construction, welding and hospitality. Sizewell C is expected to provide clean, homegrown electricity to around 6 million homes, marking the largest UK nuclear building programme in decades. This complements plans to develop small modular reactors, also known as SMRs, and increased research and development in fusion energy, with over £2.5 billion allocated over the next 5 years. Alongside nuclear, the government announced more than £6 billion for the defence nuclear sector, focusing on submarine production and redeveloping His Majesty's Naval Base, Clyde, in Scotland, with an initial £250 million over the next 3 years. Additional funding will support Sheffield Forgemasters, securing hundreds of skilled jobs. The Ministry of Defence investment reflects commitments made in the recent Strategic Defence Review. The Scottish Government has criticised the UK Government's focus on English energy projects, highlighting the lack of funding for Scotland's Acorn carbon capture project and pointing to the recent closure of the Grangemouth oil refinery and job losses across Scotland's energy sector. SNP spokesman Dave Duggan criticised Westminster for prioritising expensive nuclear investments in England while neglecting Scotland's local energy industries. The local MP for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East, Seamus Loden, cautiously welcomed an anticipated UK government funded announcement for the Acorn project, but emphasised the need for a substantial investment programme to support jobs and economic growth in Scotland. Now, Maureen, I understand that you are local to Aberdeenshire, so I was wondering what your opinion is over the current funding disputes over Scotland's Acorn carbon capture project.
Well, the word on the grapevine is that it is going to be in the spending review tomorrow, and at last it's going to take its place along with 2 or 3, is it, in England, that have already been announced on carbon capture and storage, although the Acorn project was far more along the development road than these 2 in England were. So if it comes, it's good news, but we need to know the detail and when the money is going to follow it, because as I say, it has been in the pipeline for ages. I mean, I think the wider issue of today's announcement is my utter despair at the announcement of this huge investment into nuclear. I mean, my answer would be Hinkley Point, Hinkley C. How much has that gone over budget? I mean, billions over budget and loads behind schedule, and it's still not finished. And yet we're talking about building another one at Sizewell. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous when we could be spending money much more effectively in renewables and not creating the waste, which is never mentioned. The nuclear waste is never mentioned in any of these announcements and how it's going to be disposed of. Apart from the fact that that in itself is dangerous, the nuclear in this age of uncertainty and a move away from a post-war era to a pre-war era, that we are building these places which are obviously targets for any of our enemies and dangerous, as we've seen in Fukushima and the one in Ukraine, which his name escapes me at the moment. Chernobyl, thank you. I think it's the wrong direction, together with the huge amount of money being spent in defence. I'm reminded of my economics lecture in year one at Strathclyde University of the difference between spending on guns and butter, and I think we're just going back decades, if not centuries, in terms of the way we spend money. I think it's kind of quick fixes on hoping that people will go into these industries, whereas, there are loads of other things we could be investing in, like, as I said, a huge housing sector boost. And even these small reactors, I think, are just to please the people like Rolls-Royce who build these, and even they, the danger of these and the safety of these cannot be guaranteed. So very depressing news in my view.
Absolutely, yeah. So we need another white elephant project. So if I could ask Maureen, just what do you think Scotland's role in energy production should be in the future, if not nuclear?
Well, I mean, we're seeing how we're already producing more electricity than the grid can cope with, and exporting. Well, no, we're not exporting it. We're just sending it free, gratis, for nothing, down to England without getting any benefit from it. But I mean, we already have a mix. We already have a mix of energy sources in Scotland, not least hydropower and storage there. And I think there should be a big push on solar and battery storage in individual houses. And there's a long way to go in renewables, which can more than power Scotland and send it for export, hopefully for money back.
We'll be coming on to emissions later on in the programme. For now, we'll just move on to our next story, which, of course, the current updates on the terrible tragedy that's happened in Austria. So, at least 10 people were killed and dozens injured in a school shooting in Graz, Austria on Tuesday morning. The gunman, a 21-year-old former student, opened fire in 2 classrooms at Bord Durchenstrasse High School. The attack is Austria's deadliest post-war school shooting. Police confirmed the presumed shooter was among the dead, having fatally shot himself after the incident. Local reports indicate up to 30 others were injured, with some seriously. Emergency services, including special forces and helicopters, conducted a major operation in the area, lasting around 90 minutes before they declared the scene safe. Pupils and staff were evacuated and the school building was thoroughly searched. Families gathered at a nearby sports hall where crisis teams provided support. The area around the school was cordoned off, with armed officers guarding all surrounding streets, and public transport routes were diverted. Authorities confirmed the gunman was armed with a legally owned pistol and shotgun. Austria allows ownership of certain firearms with authorization, though machine guns and pump-action guns are banned. Despite this, mass shootings have remained a relative rarity in the country. Austrian Interior Minister Gerhard Karner and Chancellor Karl Nehammer travelled to Graz following the attack. President Alexander Van der Bellen described the shooting as a national tragedy and expressed solidarity with the victims' families. European Commissioner President Ursula von der Leyen and EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas also offered condolences, emphasising the importance of keeping schools safe. The incident has shocked the nation and raised questions about gun laws and school security. Austria, with one of Europe's highest rates of civilian gun ownership, now faces the challenge of responding to this devastating event. So Maureen, that's absolutely tragic news that's coming out of Austria today. Now, Austrian media, I understand, are stating this is the worst school shooting in the country's history. I just wonder if I can just get your opinion on this story.
Oh, it's really sad. And, you know, in a normally law-abiding country like Austria that just gets on with things, this will be a terrible blow to its population. We're kind of used to, if you can get used to these things happening in the United States, but for it to happen in Austria, I think will be a big shock to the population there. You know, are we going to find out why it happened, as it would appear that the shooter shot himself thereafter? I'm no doubt they'll be trawling through his home computer to find out what was going on in his mind. If it brings about a change in gun laws, I mean, hunting is very popular in Austria. So if it brings about a change in gun laws, but it appears that his weapons were lawful. So if it brings about a tightening of gun laws, that's to be welcomed in any country. But yeah, a very sad day in Austria.
Well, what I wonder is Austria actually has some of the highest gun ownership in Europe as population. And the only comparable event in recent Scottish history is, of course, the tragic Dunblane massacre, which led to the Firearms Acts, which largely banned private firearms in Scotland and the UK. Do you think this has been a major factor why we as a nation have avoided such tragedies in recent years? And is this something other countries should consider?
You know, sometimes there's just nothing you can do to avoid what goes on in people's minds and what they decide that they're going to do. You know, you can increase security. Do we know whether the schools have the same security as we have in Scotland? You can take as many measures as you like to try and prevent some things, but you just cannot, as a society, prevent everything. And that's what makes a tragedy, when it does occur, so awful for parents and as we've said, the whole country. As I said, hunting is very popular in Austria, and maybe that's why they have so many guns. But, you know, to see them used in this way is absolutely heartbreaking.
It is indeed, and our thoughts and prayers always go out to the people of Austria at this dark time. Moving on, so President Trump has deployed 700 Marines and doubled the National Guard presence in Los Angeles to 4,000, escalating tensions amid protests over the immigration raids in the city. This rare military mobilization against US citizens has sparked concerns over threats to democracy and civil rights. The deployment followed widespread demonstrations in response to federal immigration crackdowns, targeting workers in the garments district and other sectors. These raids led to the arrest of immigrant community leaders and caused significant public outcry. Despite police using tear gas and rubber bullets, protests remained largely peaceful, with many families pleading for detained relatives to be released. California Governor Gavin Newsom criticised the federal mobilization, highlighting that much of the National Guard remains unused and the deployment bypassed his authority as Commander-in-Chief of the State Guard. California also filed a lawsuit challenging the federal government's action as an unprecedented power grab, undermining state sovereignty. The lawsuit describes the raids as unnecessarily aggressive, involving paramilitary tactics without coordination with local law enforcement. The mayor of Los Angeles condemned the raids and the military presence, describing the city as a proud city of immigrants and expressing concern over detainees being denied legal access. Civil rights groups criticised the militarised police response, noting injuries to protesters and journalists and warning that the use of riot gear was escalating tensions. The federal government, in response, defended its actions as necessary to enforce immigration laws and remove dangerous individuals. However, this marked the first federal deployment of National Guard troops without a governor's request since 1965, and the first use of active duty Marines in a domestic setting since the 1992 LA riots, raising fears over the use of military force against American civilians. The events in Los Angeles highlighting the growing strain between federal and state authorities, with implications for US democracy and civil liberties amid intensified immigration enforcement. So, Maureen, if I can just open this up to you, what's your opinion on this ongoing story, and do you see Trump's move as being an overstep by the federal government?
Absolutely. I almost think he wanted to take on Gavin Newsom because he kind of, just doesn't like the guy. Obviously, clearly they are poles apart in terms of their politics. And, Los Angeles was seen as a kind of sanctuary city and lived very peacefully with its immigrants who were in the main contributing hugely to the economy. I mean, you never heard of, mass shootings in Los Angeles or, gangs and things like that. Maybe they are there, but, not to the extent that anybody was overly concerned about them. I honestly feel that Trump almost wanted to initiate this. And it's clearly to get the numbers up in terms of deporting as what he sees as illegal immigrants. And as I say, to go into Los Angeles, which was seen as a sanctuary city, it's almost as if it was just a power mad thing that he thought he could do. We have, as I say, there are a large number of Latinos there who contribute positively to society there, and people have been detained who were born in the US. So I think it's just awful, and the actions of a power-crazy president who wants to show that his authority goes and reaches all of the US, regardless of what local democracy says and how it is working in a place like Los Angeles. It's just awful.
Well, I wonder if I can just get your opinion. Do you feel this is a measure that Trump would take in a Republican district as opposed to a Democratic stronghold like Los Angeles?
That's interesting. We'll just have to wait and see, but probably not, unless he's got the agreement of the Republican leaders there.
Yes, and also just another thing, do you feel that this is... Okay, well, what we're going to do is just going to move on to our next story. We're just going to keep it local to Scotland from now on. So, a recent report has shown that the Scottish Crime and Justice Survey finds that people now feel safer in their communities. From 2023 to 24, it shows that overall crime in Scotland, particularly property and violent crime, remains significantly lower than in 2008, with many people reporting feeling safer in their communities despite some increases since 2021-22. The survey highlights the impact of sustained policing efforts led by the Scottish Government. According to the survey, around 80% of adults were not victims of any crime, including fraud and computer misuse, which were included for the first time. Approximately 20% experienced at least one crime, with property crimes affecting 10.3% of adults, violent crimes at 2.9%, and fraud and computer misuse at 9.5%. While property and violent crimes combined rose slightly since 2021-22, levels remain comparable to the pre-pandemic year of 2019-20, and well below figures from 2008-9. Long-term trends show a 37% reduction in property and violent crime since 2008-9. Violent crime is down 27% and property crime has fallen 41%. Most violent incidents continue to be minor assaults with little or no injury. However, fraud and computer misuse, including bank and credit card fraud, are areas of concern, of about 1 in 10 adults affected. Most victims of fraud were eventually reimbursed. Public confidence in the police's ability to handle incidents and solve crimes remains generally positive, though fewer than half rate their local police as doing an excellent or good job. Despite this, 75% of people said they feel safe walking home in their local area after dark, which is up from 66% in 2008 or 9. Justice Secretary Angela Constance reported that the survey confirms the success of long-term policing strategies in reducing crime and increasing public safety. She noted ongoing investment of over £6 million in violence prevention alongside record police funding. The Scottish Government aims to build on this progress while addressing emerging challenges such as cybercrime and the recent rise in certain offences. The survey is an important tool funded by the Scottish Government that allows people across Scotland to report their experiences and helps shape policies on community safety, policing and justice. Maureen, if I can just bring you in here now. What's your take on this, and what measures have you seen the Scottish Government take to promote safer streets and crime reduction over the last 10 years?
Well, first of all, I think I wonder if this will be well reported by the media. I somehow doubt it because they want to highlight the knife crime that has been happening recently. I mean, I think this is a very important report that should be well covered by the mainstream media, because I think there's a tendency for some in the political sphere to prey on people's fear of crime, and this shows that Scotland in the main is a very safe country and safer almost than it's ever been. The main area of crime is cyber crime, but even there, I think you said that most people get their money back. I mean, if I think locally, the number of drug raids, successful drug raids that have been in the Aberdeen and surrounding area recently has been huge, and the amount of drugs that they've taken off the market has been really impressive. So it's important, I think, that the message gets across that in the vast majority of the time we live in a very safe country where it is okay to walk the streets at night. And I think older people should be particularly reassured by this, because it's never really been the case that older people have been the targets of crime. It's more likely to be young people in their own social sphere, if you like.
Yeah, well, it's always good to see that things in Scotland are improving, and who doesn't want to walk home safely at night? So moving on, what we're going to do now is touch a little bit more on the renewable sector and how it's been affecting Scotland. So Scotland's net greenhouse gas emissions fell by 1.9% in 2023, reducing by 0.8 million tonnes of carbon dioxide, equivalent compared to 2022. This decline reflects Scottish Government policies despite a perceived lack of commitment and underinvestment from the UK Government. The largest decrease occurred in electricity generation, driven mainly by a reduction in gas-fired power. Smaller reductions were recorded in fuel supply, buildings, domestic transport, industry and waste sectors. Agricultural emissions remained almost unchanged. However, emissions from international aviation and shipping rose, returning to pre-pandemic levels, alongside increases in land use change and forestry. Overall, since 1990, Scotland has cut net emissions by over 51%, a reduction of 41.6 million tonnes, with all sectors except international aviation and shipping showing falls. The Scottish Government highlights that these reductions result from initiatives such as extending free bus travel, tree planting and peatland restoration. Acting Net Zero Secretary Gillian Martin emphasises ongoing plans to further reduce emissions, including a heat in buildings bill aiming to decarbonise heating by 2045, abolishing Stockwell peak fares, and increasing funding to £54.4 million for low carbon projects like zero emission vehicles and bus decarbonisation. The Scottish Government stresses the need for the UK Government to use its powers to support Scotland's climate goals effectively. It points to net zero as an opportunity to boost the economy, improve public health, and protect the environment for future generations. This ties a little bit more into what you were saying for generating growth in Scotland. So I just wanted to get an idea of what do you think of these figures and what challenges has the Scottish Government faced so far in making headway in reducing overall emissions?
You know, it's interesting that most of the topics that we've covered this evening reinforce my belief that the Scottish Government is on the right track on most things. This latest report on emissions is really to be welcomed. I think, you know, I'm sure that at some point in my life as an MSP, I remember that we set annual targets for getting emissions down, and I just thought that was the silliest thing ever, because you're never going to get a uniform decrease over each year on emissions. I think it's interesting that transport and buildings are still some of the major ones that are the source of the emissions. I think those can be tackled, about like what we were talking about earlier in terms of building more houses. Absolutely vital that the new buildings that we build are as emission free as possible. I think that is happening. But the renovations of old buildings, especially tenement buildings, is a huge task and would require billions. Perhaps it would have been better if the money that is spent on nuclear was spent on that, because we need thousands of people to work in that. It's interesting that little has happened on aviation and shipping, and that is something that's obviously tackled by the Westminster government. But the Econ project would go a long way to reducing emissions in Scotland, and that's to be welcomed if it comes tomorrow.
Absolutely. So, in terms of other news, the Scottish Government has announced new legislation aimed at strengthening Gaelic and Scots education across Scotland. From now on, parents will be able to request the establishment of a Gaelic school in their area, with local authorities required to assess the practicality and affordability of such requests. Under the proposed Scottish Languages Bill, ministers may direct local authorities to create a new Gaelic school if the assessment deems it viable. The legislation also includes the introduction of educational standards for both Gaelic and Scots, recognising them as official languages. Additionally, the bill supports the designation of Gaelic-speaking areas of linguistic significance to help target policies that promote the language's development. Parents across Scotland will also be able to apply for Gaelic nursery and early years places, expanding access to Gaelic education from an early age. The Scottish Government is investing £5.7 million this year to promote both Gaelic and Scots languages, aiming to support their continued growth. These measures form part of a broader effort to build on the increasing number of Gaelic speakers and learners in Scotland. Gaelic medium education is viewed as beneficial to communities, often showing higher academic performance without additional costs compared to English medium schools. The Scottish Government's plans emphasise the importance of preserving and promoting Indigenous languages as a key part of Scotland's cultural heritage. This announcement coincides with the 40th anniversary of Gaelic medium education in this country. By strengthening legislation and funding, the Scottish Government intends to ensure that Gaelic and Scots remain vital languages within Scotland's education system and society. So, Maureen, going by Scottish Government figures since 2011, the overall number of people in Scotland with Gaelic ability has grown substantially, with over 43,000 more speakers. Can you elaborate more on how you think this trend can or will continue?
Well, it doesn't happen by itself, and it does require government to be proactive in promoting Gaelic, like through Gaelic medium education. I think most of it has come from Gaelic medium education rather than Gaelic speakers making sure that subsequent generations speak Gaelic. It's clear that a large number of parents see the benefit of bilingualism from the very early years, and we know that it's good for your education overall if you can speak more than one language. It trains your brain in a very positive way. This language bill has been a long time in the making, and while we've talked most about Gaelic, we should not forget Scots and include that, the Doric, as really important in making people feel good about themselves and that they don't have to always speak the King's English when they're then conversing. And I'm looking forward this weekend to going to my hometown of Keith, where the traditional Music and Song Festival, TMSA, is celebrating its 50th year this year. I remember going to the first one. So these kind of events need to be helped and promoted as well to promote our Scottish culture and make people in Scotland feel good enough about themselves to feel that they can run their own country.
Yes, and when you previously sat as an MSP, what responses did you get from councils and local leaders when encouraging the promotion of Gaelic, Scots and Doric culture and language?
Well, there's still some of the naysayers in that, but I was the first MSP to ever take their oath in Doric as well as English in the Parliament. Many followed. And that was, it got an amazing coverage in the newspapers at the time. So yes, there will be those who do not see the value of being able to speak in different languages. But as I've said, it's really important to your education.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we always want to promote Scottish culture and tradition here. So just moving on to our next story. The Scottish Government has opened applications for the 5th year of Marine Fund Scotland, which will allocate £40 million in 2025-26 to support the country's marine economy. The fund aims to advance Scotland's blue economy vision by promoting sustainable use of marine resources and helping coastal communities thrive. Marine Fund Scotland offers grants to individuals, businesses and organisations developing innovative projects that contribute to a sustainable marine economy and Scotland's net zero ambitions. Since 2021, the fund has awarded over £55 million to 330 projects, attracting a total investment of £121 million. Last year, 67 projects received grants ranging from under £1,000 to £1.6 million. Funding upgrading seafood processing to reduce energy use, establishing Scotland's first facility to recycle fishing nets and marine litter, supporting young fishers to buy their first vessel, and marine research to protect wild salmon. The Scottish Government views the marine economy as vital to the economic and social fabric of rural, coastal and island communities. It is calling on the UK Government to devolve a fair share of the recently announced £360 million Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund to Scotland. The Scottish Government warns that if the UK Government retains control of the fund, it risks duplicating existing programmes and causing confusion among stakeholders, which could dilute the benefits intended for marine industries and coastal areas. The Marine Fund Scotland forms part of the Scottish Government's broader strategy to promote innovation, sustainability and job creation across marine sectors, ensuring continued support for communities reliant on the sea. Applications for the 25 to 26 funding cycle open today. So, Maureen, traditionally, when the Marine Fund has run in previous years, what economic benefits has this brought to Scottish communities over the past years? And overall, how do you feel it feeds into the overall Scottish vision for our maritime communities?
Well, I think it's really important that we support our coastal communities, which form, a large part of our rural economy. And clearly, if we can get new people into fishing as well as farming, that is really good for our local economies. But I think we need to link it with tourism, for example. There's a huge increase in cold water swimming. And I think of Tarlair on the northeast coast, where there used to be a seawater swimming pool there. I wonder if that's on the list, because there's been huge development to get that back up and running. The cafe there is already up and running. So I hope coastal communities like that can bid for some of this money. But in terms of people getting money for vessels, I think that's really good. I think the call to devolve the Westminster scheme to Scotland would make a huge amount of sense. So not only that there's not duplication, but we have got a better idea of what of our coastal communities in Scotland, with all its diversity, from the Highlands and Islands to the east and west coast. In the south part of our country, they're all very diverse, and I think we know better than any Westminster government and its civil servants would know, in terms of using that money wisely and avoiding the duplication, but making each pound go much further if we had the coordination of using all the funds together to give that extra money that might make the difference between things languishing for years before they come to fruition, or coming to fruition quickly.
Absolutely. And overall, how are industry bodies, the fishing industry, the seafood industry responding to this announcement?
Well, I haven't seen the responses. I hope they welcome it. Clearly, the sea fishing industry has been hit by the way that Stammer has given away fishing quotas to Europe in recent days. But the fishing industry, despite Brexit, seemed to have stabilised a bit. But if we can get more fish coming from our wonderful clean seas and going, not only going abroad to Europe and elsewhere to be eaten, but also to be eaten in our restaurants at home, it can only be a good thing.
Super. Thank you very much for your time. Okay, Maureen, thank you very much. That's it for this evening, Scotland at 7. Thanks to our guest, Maureen. And before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. We have raised over £10,000 this year so far, £14,000 less than we need to be on target to pay our bills every month. And we urgently need to raise as much of that £14,000 as possible immediately. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you, and thank you again to our guest. And goodbye, and thank you very much for watching. There we go. How was that?
It's quite an echo came recently. Can you hear it?